Library. First, I'd like to thank Chrissy and Eve from Elm Street Books for coming and providing the books for sale. You can have them signed after the talk. Our special guest moderator tonight is author and screenwriter Greg Wands. He's co-written 3 books with Elizabeth Keenan under the pen name of E.G. Scott, including The Woman Inside, which was an international bestseller. Greg will be chatting with Alex and Nelson DeMille, who have co-written their second Brody and Taylor novel. The first was the New York Times bestseller, The Deserter. Scott and Maggie are back in Bloodlines, which just came out on Tuesday, and this time they're in Berlin investigating the murder of one of their own CID agents. Alex DeMille is a director, film editor, author, and has won awards for his screenplays and films. He received his MFA in film directing from UCLA, and this is his second novel. His dad, Nelson, is the New York Times bestselling author of 22 novels, a combat-decorated U.S. Army veteran, a member of Mensa, and among many other things, my favorite author ever. Please join me in welcoming Greg, Nelson, and Alex.
Thank you for being here, everyone. Thank you to Ferguson Library, and thank you, gentlemen. I'm very excited to talk to you about this book, which I enjoyed immensely. Bloodlines, pick it up right over there. Elm Street Books is selling books here, and they are wonderful. And yeah, there they are, Chrissy and Eve. I was going to start out with, I just wanted to quote a brief part of a review about The Deserter, the DeMille's first book together, from the New York Journal of Books. The review goes, I quote, "If you like thrillers fast-paced, intelligent, tough, and good to the last drop, The Deserter is right up your alley. An unrelenting edge-of-your-seat ride." And I have to say, gentlemen, Bloodline certainly follows in that same mold. Now, while this book certainly can be read as a standalone and holds up on its own merits, it is reintroducing the 2 main characters from The Deserter, Special Agents Brody and Taylor. They're back in action in this story here, and I wonder if you could tell us a bit about their latest mission.
Sure.
Yeah. Why'd you do that?
Yeah, he likes to make me do this question. So at its heart, it's a murder mystery. Scott Brody, Maggie Taylor, special agents in Army CID. They're sent to Berlin because a fellow agent who is based out of basically the hub of Army CID base, which is near Frankfurt. This agent, Harry Vance, is found dead, shot, assumedly by a sniper. He's found dead inside of a city park in a neighborhood of Neukölln in Berlin, which is predominantly made up of lots of Turkish immigrants and recent refugees from Syria and Libya and other places. So the initial, they're kind of walking into like a powder keg of political difficulties dealing with the German government and everything. And as they continue to investigate, our 2 agents go a little rogue and start to realize that the official narrative might not be what's going on. So as they investigate, they start to uncover things from the past, including the potential. I don't want to do any spoilers. Anyway, they uncover a lot of layers having to do with former East Germany, the Stasi secret police, an American traitor who was never caught, and also the burgeoning neo-Nazi movement that is gaining more and more power in Germany.
To my eye, you have done an incredible amount of research in this story, from government procedural detail to geographic specificity and the cultural customs around the immigrant communities that you mentioned. Could you tell us a bit about the process of researching this novel?
Yeah. Alex and I went to Berlin. I went to Berlin right before the wall came down, and I went right afterward. I've been to Berlin about 4 times, and I took Alex in the year 2000. He kind of took to the place, and he went back on his own. It's kind of a young city in some ways. It's a young, vibrant city. You don't think of Berlin that way, but while it's still young and vibrant, I found it, like buried in layers of tragic history, and you still see bomb scars, shrapnel scars on the buildings. It's a very atmospheric place. It was always a setting for Cold War thrillers. So we decided to set it in Berlin, or actually Alex made the decision. So we were going to go to Berlin to research it, but then COVID happened, so we didn't go. But we'd been there, each of us about 4 times. And through the magic of the internet, you can actually pull up buildings and you can, maps and the whole thing. So that was that research. The other research is a little more difficult, having to do with, the attitudes of the people, the rise of the neo-Nazi movement, and the stress and strains caused by the Islamic, well, not Islamic, but let's say Muslim immigrants who were coming to Germany as, looking for asylum or looking, just for a better way of life. So while we were doing the research, we, discovered things we didn't know, and we'd been to Berlin many times. And sometimes with the research, researchers suggest a plot line, something you didn't think about, because you're finding out something that could be, turned into, a plot point. So most research projects are kind of fun. This one I think was really enlightening, not so much fun as enlightening. And when we finished all the research, he did most of it. I let him do the heavy lifting now. We thought we had a good setting for a book. And most of the book, 90% of it is set in Berlin. And where people have read the book say, people who've been to Berlin say, they really, and people actually who are native, we know some Germans said, you really captured the city. And so I give Alex some credit for that. He can do research on the internet that I can't do. I can barely turn on a computer.
There's a great quote in there, a line that's history is prologue. And a number of the things you just mentioned, in fact, the fall of the Berlin Wall, also the long shadow of the Cold War. You have, the reemergence of fascism, the neo-Nazi movement, xenophobia around these immigrant communities. There really is a sense in this book of the idea of history repeating in a very vivid way, and I wondered what made you or led you to lean into that as a kind of a theme for the novel.
Well, let Alex do that one.
Sure. Well, one of the facts that I learned early on that sort of sparked something in me was, I was doing all the research about all these like right-wing political movements in Germany, many of which it might not be fair to characterize as neo-Nazi. There's obviously a spectrum, but let's say from kind of mainstream conservative up to the most extreme, all of the power centers of this are in the former East, and the former communist Germany is now becoming the hotbed of fascism. So what is that about? And I found that interesting, and the way that these lines that are drawn by history kind of don't go away, right? I mean, you might draw new ones, but they kind of stay. When I went there in 2000, I was 20. The fall of the Berlin Wall, the end of the Cold War, to me, it was the same as the fall of the Roman Empire. To me, it was a long ago thing. I didn't have a lot of associations with it. I have no memory of it, really. But it was only 11 years prior. So when we went there and I saw the places where the wall had used to be, and you still saw these open, overgrown fields in the middle of this affluent capital city, and that kind of shocked me. I realized, oh, this wasn't that long ago. And even now, of course, a lot of that's been built up, but you still feel it, and you can still sense it. And when you take a train, let's say from Western Germany to East Germany, you can still tell you're going into a different place. So I think that the way that those divisions kind of draw themselves was interesting. Obviously, has lots of relevance for our country too, and the divisions in this country. So I don't know. It all seemed like a rich tapestry for a book.
I mean, to that point, it's very ambitious in terms of scale and scope, in terms of all of the things that you're trying to weave into this tapestry of a story, this many-layered tapestry of a novel. I wondered, what were some of the more challenging aspects in terms of the research or the execution or threading things into a narrative?
Alex did a lot of the contemporary research, but I kind of knew Berlin going back to the maybe the early '90s, or actually late '80s, before I was there, before the wall came down. But I also read all these World War II books, like The Last Battle by Cornelius Ryan. So what I brought into the book was the history, the tragic history. I mean, our main character, Scott Brody, he knows some of this, and he thinks about it. Well, he's standing on the street corner, and he said, you know, what happened here? We don't know what happened here. When the Russians, you know, took over the city, how many people were killed here? And they stand in front of the Reichstag, and we've all seen those pictures of the Brandenburg Gate and the Reichstag and the Russian army and the swastika being dynamited. And he thinks back to that. And what we're trying to do is integrate, you know, again, what I call the tragic history of the city, a tortured history, into a contemporary novel, but have it not to publish your research notes. We all know, you know, we do a lot of research. It sounds good. Let's publish it. No, you have to kind of pick and choose, but it's got to also advance the plot. And I think, you know, again, most of the reviewers who commented on the book, you know, are commenting about how we made Berlin like real.
We're making this book sound really heavy, but I promise it's fun. It's
Yeah, right.
It's funny. It's fun. It moves.
Yeah.
It's a thriller.
Well, that sets me up beautifully for the next question. I was going to, both of the books you've written together have been lauded justly so for their pacing, for this kind of high octane movement and speed. And I wondered, I think for readers and writers alike, that's something that we're all interested in, is how you maintain a good clip in a book, in a thriller specifically. Do you guys have any tricks of the trade or techniques that you can kind of impart?
I can weigh in on what was hard for me that maybe you obviously have a lot more experience with, but was when you don't have these classic thriller scenes where it's literally a meeting of a bunch of people sitting around a table that there's a scene in this book, but the point of it is introducing characters and also introducing tension, but nobody's chasing each other, nobody's trying to kill each other. It's just a collection of egos sitting around a table. How do you make that compelling? How do you make that move? And that was hard to do. I think that for me anyway, not having as much experience doing that, but the kind of the stuff that was less of the action adventure portions of the book, finding the places to still engage the audience and make sure it's always moving forward.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, you know, the pacing is important, and it's hard to pace a book until you finish the book. Then you got to go back and start to, you know. Greg, who said the famous line about pacing in a speedy book? Is somebody said, when you're writing it, leave out the parts that nobody wants to read. And yeah, I can't. You remember that? Yeah. I'll have to think of who said that. It was a very funny line, but also a very true line. Leave out the parts that nobody wants to read.
I believe that was, pardon me, I think that was Elmore Leonard.
It was
right?
Elmore
It was
Leonard.
Elmore Leonard.
Yes, it was Elmore Leonard. And every writer should have that on his desk. Leave out the parts that nobody wants to read. Writers, you know, can get verbose. Alex came from screenwriting. He was a screenwriter. So, you know, his discipline is to keep it short. Most screenplays are maybe 120 pages at the most. I used to kid him. I said, only 120 pages are triple spaced with 5-inch margins on both sides. But that's the pacing. You can't have a slow-paced movie. And I think he brought that discipline into the book. And some of my books, you know, are a little bit heavy in some parts. But modern readers really do want to go forward. But some readers really do revel in descriptions. The old Victorian books were this thick because they had to describe everything. There was no TV. There were no movies. A Victorian reader reading about, let's say, the pyramids really needed them explained in detail, or a room, or, you know, any kind of setting. Now we can take shortcuts because everybody has, you know, some background and, you know, visual background on almost anything you're talking about. So you try to get more into the interior. But again, at the end, we wound up with maybe 550 type page. Whatever we wound up with, we set a goal of cutting about 10% of it, knowing that the editor was going to ask for another 10% cut. They always do.
You mentioned coming from somewhat different backgrounds, obviously, as a novelist, coming from a film background and a screenwriting background. Also, I believe I heard in an interview at one point that you still write longhand, right, and you type. So you're coming from somewhat disparate backgrounds and sounds like processes as well. I wonder how that lines up when you're co-writing a project such as this.
Yeah, so I mean, when I first started on the previous book, The Deserter, I think my instincts were to you know, put as many like ellipses as possible, skip through things, and which is fine. There's lots of novels written that way, but that's not necessarily the way he writes. And his name's on the book too. So we have these. But once I started to kind of come to the pace of the novel, it was great. I was suddenly like, oh, this is actually what I want to be doing, and being able to live in the story and find all these different moments that are developing the characters and developing the story and the tension, living inside somebody's head for a minute, all these things you can't really do in a screenplay. And from a workflow standpoint, we just, right from the start, I mean, I was writing the first draft on the computer. I would email pages to his office, his assistant prints it out, he sharpens his pencil, and then does this all over the pages. And then I get scans back of my typewritten pages that's just covered in pencil scrawl. And I remember a party trick. I was at a party and I had gotten an email with these, and I was showing the PDF on my phone I was like, can anybody read a single word that he's written on here? And nobody else could, but I could, so that's why I kept the job. Even having that artifact of our collaboration is really amazing. Seeing sometimes it's very small things that have very big impact. You know, change of diction, taking out a dialogue tag or moving it, and that changes the kind of the flow. Adding a line of dialogue here, changing the way that something is described. Sometimes there was bigger stuff with some of the more challenging chapters. We really had to work it back and forth, but sometimes it was small changes that had a big impact on the book.
Just to expand a little bit, I'm curious, coming from more of a screenwriting background, how much of the shift was intuitive for you, and then how much were you kind of employing different tools in the kit, so to speak?
I think it was intuitive mostly. I mean, honestly, it was having his voice in my head from being from growing up with him, having read all of his books. So there was always that to fall back on. I wasn't starting from scratch and thinking like, what is my voice as a novelist? Because I was finding it, but I was finding it inside of this other context, you know. So.
One of the things that strikes me about this book is that you employ humor really effectively to provide a bit of balance or levity against what can be, fairly heavy subject matter. I was just wondering if you could speak about that stylistic approach a little bit.
Yeah, I'm on my 22nd novel. My original novels didn't have much humor. I wrote like most people. They're kind of, straightforward, and serious stuff sounded serious. But then I started thinking, some of this is funny, and when I first tried it, I think the first time I tried it in earnest was in Gold Coast, with people making quips and jokes, and the editors got upset. They said, "This is like," but also when you're writing about cops are funny. Cops have cop humor, and a few of my books were Vietnam books, and I use GI humor, and I kind of remembered that people, Americans especially, are humorous. Make jokes about, under the worst circumstances. In Vietnam, when I was in Vietnam, we were getting shot at one day. I remember we were getting mortars in, people shooting at us. And one guy yells out, "Is this a training exercise?" No, but that's the kind of humor, that the GI develops, and the kind of humor I think cops, firemen, people in, those kinds of occupations. And I decided to start doing more of that in my books. And that's about the time my sales went up too, I think. You always like to say to an editor, "I told you so, I told you so."
Oh, yeah.
Right.
Very satisfying.
Right.
Sure. Well, it's funny that this is a training exercise actually made it into the dialogue. That's one of Brody's lines in the book. I remember laughing at that in particular. This brings me to another question as well. You have served yourself and then have been writing about military culture for a lot of your career. One of the things in this book that's really wonderful is how much the protagonists are having to work around kind of the governmental bureaucracy, the interagency infighting, and all of that kind of thing. And I wonder, in your experience from serving and writing about that culture for a long time, is that something that's always been that kind of ego-driven dysfunction? Has that been something that's been prevalent throughout, or is that something that's developed in more recent years?
No, I mean, I think I was born that way. I never took the world as I saw it. I said, you know, who made these rules? I didn't make them, and I've always been a little bit iconoclastic, and it's always gotten me in trouble, which is fine. But when I got in the army, it's a little bit more, you know, buttoned down. But you have to work around the system, and I've always worked around the system, and the people who are going to make it in the world, people who are going to be, you know, world leaders or whatever they're going to be, they've got to work around the system. The system doesn't always work. Some of the system sometimes is dysfunctional itself. You know, Brody's in this. This book is set in Germany, and we kind of make a little bit fun of the Germans about how strict they are about rules and regulations, and but also the United States Army can be on the surface strict about. And Brody and Taylor are both, you know, kind of maverick. He's more maverick than she is, but she's learning from him. And they realize, you know, this case is not going to be solved the way it's being processed. There's something else going on here, and people are not thinking outside the box, and people are working within the system, and they decide there's a better way of doing it, which is their way, and of course they're right. Otherwise, we'd have no book.
Yeah, no, it does provide some of the great tension in the storyline is how much these, as you said, maverick agents are having to sidestep some very inefficient bureaucracy, which bubbles up at various times, and that becomes a thing. And I was also kind of curious about your personal experience having served and then having just been writing about that culture, if you find that to have been, how much of that are you kind of embellishing, or how much of that really is the culture?
Yeah, you know, it's been a while since I've been in the Army, but the Army doesn't change that much. And you know, when the term maverick is used often in the Army, and that's to describe usually an officer who's maverick. It's got like two meanings. One is bad, you're going to get people hurt or killed. The other one is good, you're thinking outside the box. The Army's always been ambivalent about their, you know, their maverick officers or NCOs. You know, I was an officer, I was a lieutenant in the Army, and it occurred to me that I would never be a captain in this Army because I was doing things differently. So I left. You know, you can't buck a system that big forever. But you know, yeah. That's who I was when I went into the service, and that's who I was when I was in college, which is probably why it took me 5.5 years to get out of college. But I found myself with writing. All of a sudden, you know, you can't always do what you want to do, but certainly you can present that kind of world on the page and have fun doing it. Yeah.
As you were finding yourself drawn to writing, and Alex, maybe in your case with film, it was with filmmakers. Are there any particular writers, filmmakers, creatives, artists that either, you know, were examples for you as you were starting out, or maybe put you on the track even to your artistic careers?
I mean, obviously, growing up with a novelist father, I kind of took it for granted this was a thing people did, you know. Yeah, your dad's a lawyer, my dad's a writer. And when I went to graduate school at UCLA, the most common story I heard from other people who were in the same program was how much they had to fight with their parents who thought they were insane, that they were going to take on debt to go to graduate program for filmmaking. And it occurred to me I never had that fight, which was a privilege, you know. Whether or not I was going to make a living at it, you know, it's okay to follow your dreams and, you know, pursue a creative occupation. Other than my father, as far as writers go, I'm a big Stephen King fan. Like, growing up reading Stephen King, I think he, entertaining commercial writer who cares a lot about language and knows how to use it really well. So that was always something I valued.
Yeah, Stephen King is brilliant. He wrote a book called On Writing, and in the book, and you've read it, most writers have read it, in the book he says, the two best commercial writers in America are Richard North Patterson and Nelson DeMille. So we love Stephen King.
Great answer. While we're kind of on this track a little bit, we were delving a bit into the film stuff as well. You know, Alex, you've had a successful career in film. Nelson, you've had your writing adapted to film. And I wondered, with these books that you've written together, have you thought about any kind of potential virtual casting for the characters if this were to be adapted into something?
I don't know about casting, but you know, I never write for the movies. And a lot of my books are, you know, some people say they're cinematic. Some of them are probably too expensive to shoot. I don't write with movie in mind, but almost all of my um, books have been optioned, and most of them had, you know, have had screenplays made out of them. I think out of 22, maybe 3 or 4 have not been optioned. Um, but usually it's the screenplay stage where the problems occur, because a lot of screenwriters um, have trouble, and they could be good screenwriters, but they have trouble adapting a novel and making a novel that's 500 pages and making it into a 100-page screenplay. So the only thing I had made was The General's Daughter. How many people saw The General's Daughter? Just about everybody, right? With John Travolta, Madeline Stowe, and Leslie Stephenson as The General's Daughter. It wasn't a bad movie. But some genesis of that, to give you an example, the first 4 or 5 screenplays came in just terrible. It was Paramount Motion Pictures. Sherry Lansing was head of studio, and I knew her. She was kind of a friend. This thing was studio driven. It was going to be made into a movie for sure, for sure. But after the 4th or 5th bad screenplay, it looked like the project was going to die. And they called in William Goldman, and you probably all remember him. And he wrote Marathon Man, and what else did he write, Greg?
Princess
Oh,
Bride.
Princess Bride, of course.
Yeah.
But he was a novelist. So they had to call in a novelist to save the screenplay. And Goldman, and I don't mean to, you know, but Goldman had done some screenwriting. But he came in and he saw what the problems were, and he took bad screenplays. He read the book, obviously. He read General's Daughter, and he turned in a really good screenplay that they shot, basically. And but the path between book and movie is a very torturous path. Some of these books, huge bestsellers, optioned by the studio right away. 5 years later, 6 years later, my maybe my best-selling book was The Gold Coast, and that's like 25 years now. It was optioned and initially when it came out, before it even came out, and it's still in pre-development. What do they call it? Development hell.
Development hell.
Development
Well,
hell.
it was. Well, he's too old now, but it was Pacino originally, right?
It was bought for Pacino.
Yeah.
Pacino was, you know, kind of a little over the hill. And in fact, the producer who bought it has now passed away. And if enough years go by, I don't think anybody's going to remember who owns the rights to it. So it's a torturous process, and I give Alex credit for being in that business. I cannot be in that business. Publishing is a little bit more, you know, structured. You know from the beginning who you are, where you are, and you know, with the chain of command is. With the movie business, people tell you they're a producer. They could be, you know, they could be a what do they call it on the set? Key grip on the set, and they tell you they're a producer. Hollywood's a funny place.
William Goldman, actually, you had mentioned on Writing by Stephen King, which is a wonderful writer's craft book. William Goldman also wrote a couple of craft books, one of which is called Which Lie Did I Tell?, which is a great read. Even if you're not a big movie person, it's a great meditation on writing. And one of the things he mentions in there that's always stuck with me is talking about when he's pitching a film and they're going through rewrites, is this idea of every story has a spine, and he can kind of tolerate when people are coming in and making suggestions, but once you kind of mess with the spine of the story, that's when it gets out of whack. Have you gentlemen had any experiences like that where you had a book, a screenplay, something like that, and you've really had to fight against someone trying to really knock the thing out of whack that way?
Yeah, but almost every book, yeah. With, not so much with the editors or the publisher, but with the whoever owns the movie rights. I mean, my John Corey series was optioned by CBS, and the whole point of the Corey series, if you've read it, is that John Corey, NYPD, now working for the Joint Terrorist Task Force, which is run by the FBI, is a clash of, you know, professional cultures there. Corey is a straightforward, straight-talking cop. The FBI guy is a little bit politically correct. And then because of this clash, it kind of gets funny. the FBI guys are doing things by the book, and Corey's crazy.
Seems like a theme in your writing.
Right, and but that was the spine of the story. That he was in different adventures, but the spine of the story was that he was working for the Joint Terrorist Task Force, and he had to toe the line. And they're a little bit politically correct at the FBI, and he makes fun of them for that. And they're kind of resentful to him because he gets away with a lot. He's kind of a maverick. But anyway, so the CBS had a pilot done for this series, and they made John Corey just a homicide cop. It had nothing to do with Joint Terrorist Task Force, nothing to do with terrorism. So my question to them was, why did you buy this book? I mean, why did you buy the series? What you've done has nothing to do with what I just wrote. But they were happy with the screenplay. Well, if they're happy, I'm supposed to be happy, but I wasn't. But that happens a lot. You get people who think they're creative, who have the power because they're producers or they're executives of the studio. They're not creative at all, and they're dealing with creative people, and they're going to tell the creative person what they want, and especially if they have screenwriters who are listening to them. Most screenwriters are better than I think some of the screenplays seem, because they're really sometimes being kind of driven by or being edited by non-creative people. I saw that with a lot of my projects.
I love the idea of the spine. I took a class on theater directing in school, and the teacher there was really into that concept. It's basically this idea that you have to hold in your head for every single decision you make, and I think it's really valuable. And I've pitched. Somebody will say, "Oh, we own the rights to this short story. We think it could be a movie. You should pitch it." And then you do, and they're saying, "Why is this? Why is that?" And then you're like, "Well, the story had a strong spine, even though I don't use that word." And you're clearly everything. Your idea has nothing to do with that. So again, why'd you buy it? Why are you having me do this in the first place? And I think adaptation-wise, a lot of adaptations of big books are missing that too. They might hit all the plot points of the book and try to cram it all in, but you watch it and something is missing, and there's like kind of lack of a cohesive vision. You're doing a literal quote unquote faithful adaptation, but you're sort of missing that spark of why you're doing it.
Yeah, it's interesting. Okay. I always like to ask authors in events like these, in the event that we have any aspiring writers in the audience, would there be any bits of advice that you might give to someone who is, starting to write a book, looking to forge a career in publishing? Anything you've learned along the way?
I always say, if you want to write a novel, you should take 2 aspirin and lay down in a dark room. I would not recommend this unless you love it. And if you love writing, it's okay, but don't expect to be published. Fewer and fewer books are being published today, and Greg, it's and the books that are being published, a lot of them are nonfiction. But I'm talking about novels specifically. There's fewer novels coming out because of, I think, modern medicine. Best-selling authors are living longer, and there's so many of them. At one time, you could probably count them on 2 hands or less. But now you could fill up, the New York Times bestseller list with living authors who are all bestsellers. Danielle Steele, who I was talking to somebody, I met her 30 years ago in New York, and she was old then. So, I mean, she just came out with a book last week. I mean, God bless her. So the list is dominated, not only is the list dominated by bestsellers, but kind of publishing is dominated by bestsellers. There was a time in publishing where they were looking for young voices and looking for mid-list books. They wanted to publish, they would publish poetry they knew wasn't going to make a nickel for them, because they were in the publishing business looking for talent and looking for new ideas. But now they're kind of a little bit more corporate, but also a little more concerned with the future, because publishing has taken a number of hits for a number of reasons.
Right. I mean, I can't really give advice about how to break in, because I kind of walked right into it. But as far as the craft goes, I would say it's been an incredible exercise in self-discipline. Whether you're if you're working another job, to pay the bills, and you still want to do this. It's, you know, wake up an hour early every day, or when you come home, you have to take an hour at the end of the day and write. But if you enjoy it, you will do that. And if you don't, then you shouldn't be doing it, I guess, is the answer. But yeah, I think it's the self-discipline it takes is a challenge. But if you can do it, then that means you care about it enough, and if you're enjoying it, then forge ahead, even though he's saying you won't get published, because who knows? Yeah, that's true until it's not true. So
Thank you for that. Can you tell us about anything you might be working on at the moment?
Alex and I are I'm working on my solo book, and we are working on our third co-authored book in the series. Well, I'll tell you about my solo, then you can tell me about the. So my solo book is not a John Corey book. It's standalone, and it's an old idea I had. I just dusted it off after 20 years. It's called the Explorers Club, and I don't know. Has anybody here been to the Explorers Club in Manhattan? Nobody. A few people. Yeah, you've been there. Incredible old place. It's, I think, from the 1890s, early 1900s. Started by explorers and people like Lowell Thomas, and it looks like something right out of right out of a Victorian novel with the big mastodon tusks and all over the book. So I was in there once 20 years ago having a drink, and as novelists do, I'm saying there's a story here somewhere. I don't know where it is, but my book starts, the one I'm writing now, starts in the Explorers Club. Sort of like an old-fashioned English novel where the gentlemen are meeting in the club and one comes to the other, and this guy, as a UN official, comes to his friend who's the explorer, the hero, and he says, "My wife has been kidnapped by the Sultan of Brunei and taken on a private plane last night, and I want you to go find her and bring her home." So that's the jump-off point. But was she kidnapped, or did she go? Or did she pack her bag and get her passport together?
You got to read the book to find out.
So yeah, we're also working on the co-author book is the next Brody and Taylor adventure. It's another murder mystery. This one is set in America. It's set in a remote secret U.S. Army base in the Mojave Desert, where they're doing training exercises between live soldiers, U.S. Army Rangers, and autonomous weapon systems like robots and AI and drones and all that kind of stuff. And a scientist is found murdered, and they know the murderer because it's one of the robots. So they have so they come to this creepy base, which is all on lockdown. It's going to be kind of a closed circle mystery in the middle of the desert, because everybody who's there is staying there, and Brody and Taylor have to figure out there's this entire stew of competing agendas of like military contractors and Army Rangers being pushed to the brink on these crazy exercises, and kind of like a crazy general, and all of these people figuring out what happened, who actually killed this guy and why, and what's going on.
These both sound great. A couple more books to keep on your reading lists. We have a few minutes now. If any audience members have any questions for these gentlemen, they're going to come around with, if you'll raise your hand, they're going to come around with a microphone. Just wait to get the microphone for the question.
Okay. I remember reading Mayday. I think it was 1979.
Yes, 79. Good memory.
And I will never forget it. It was so vivid, with those oxygen masks dropping down. And then I read several years later, Nightfall, and how you wove, and it was about TWA Flight 800, I think, how you wove that into this wonderful other novel. And I just want to tell you that I'm so impressed.
Oh, thank you. That's a good question. I love that.
The first book I read of yours was sorry, I had a brain cramp at a moment. The Gold Coast, which I thought was fabulous, and every time I turned the page, I wanted a cannoli. But the book that and I've read a lot of your books, but the one that just blew my mind, which I thought was absolutely fabulous, was The Lion. That book was phenomenal. I have never read a book like that in my life.
Oh, thank you.
It was just so good.
The Lion, but not the Lion's Game. There were two of them with similar titles.
Wait, it was The Lion that was first, right?
Lion's Game was first.
Oh, I'm sorry. It's The
Yeah.
Lion's Game that I
Right,
read. I
okay.
couldn't remember.
Yeah.
Got sorry. But anyway,
Hey.
it was just so good. And the other thing I just wanted to say was when I found out you were going to be here, I was like, oh my God, I have to come because I've been such a big fan of yours.
Thank you.
And I'm really glad you came. Thank you for coming today.
What a great audience. We love these people.
Hi, this is
Hi.
for Alex. How did you go from my nephew Emmett to become a book writer? Because that was phenomenal.
Oh, thank you. I got a phone call from my dad. I actually just finished that. What's that? Oh, sorry. Yeah, it's actually the last. I think it's the last film project I did before. We started working together on The Deserter. It was a short film about the murder of Emmett Till from the point of view of Emmett's uncle. And yeah, it was a really powerful film. I was privileged to work on it, and at that time, I was sort of preparing a shift into being more of a film editor as a career, and that film got nominated for an Oscar, which was incredible. I was like, oh, this is great. This is really gonna juice my career in editing. And then I said, oh, never mind. I'm gonna write instead, because I was writing anyway. I was writing screenplays. Some of them were maybe going somewhere. A lot of them I was writing for myself, and I was just on like draft 55, and they were just sitting on my computer. So I thought, here's an opportunity to do what I really want to do at this moment, which is write. I love editing because it's also an incredible form of storytelling, but I wanted to be writing. And here's an opportunity to work with my father. Not everybody gets that chance, and I'm glad I did it. And I'm going to be coming back to film at some point. Thank you.
Hi, I've read most of your books.
Thank you.
Is John Corey going to live on?
Is John Corey going to live on? John Corey had some issues with the last book, The Maze. It wasn't Corey had the issues, but some of the junior staff at Simon & Schuster, my publisher, had issues with John Corey. And I've spoken about this before, and I've spoken about it even on TV and radio, and I don't mind speaking about it. They had some real issues with John Corey. For some reason, I don't know why, they thought he was sexist, and they thought he was obnoxious, and they thought he was whatever. But he pled guilty to all of that. He doesn't care. That's the point. But he does it in a humorous way, and he's a different man deep down inside. We know that. But it did cause some issues, and there was issues of language and things like, as one example, the book was The Maze was kind of a novelized version of the Gilgo Beach murders. So obviously there's a lot of prostitutes. Using the word prostitute in the book often. I thought it was a nice word because John Corey's not saying hooker, he's not saying, streetwalker, he's saying prostitute. And, one of the editors, they're always anonymous, said, could Mr. DeMille use the word sex worker instead? I said, it sounds more obscene than prostitute. I thought I was doing it in a good, but the language changes, of course, and people have different sensibilities, I get it. But I'm writing about a middle-aged NYPD ex-cop. This is the way he's going to talk. He's not going to talk like that 25-year-old junior editor who wants him to talk. It's not going to happen. So we had some issues. Did I compromise? No. But I did take some advice to heart, and I made some changes, which probably could have been made anyway. But rather than get into that again, we're going to give John Corey a little bit of a rest for the next book or two, I will say.
Can I ask a part B? Gilgo Beach.
Yes.
Did your novel have anything to do with rejuvenating the investigation?
I heard that in a way it did, that my novel, it was a big bestseller, and it certainly bestseller on Long Island. Everybody wanted to read it, and this apparently stirred the Suffolk County Police and the DA in Suffolk County to look at this again. They were looking at it anyway. I mean, I'm not taking credit for it. They were looking at it anyway, but this kind of highlighted it, and it's always been an embarrassment to the DA and the Suffolk County Police that this is an 11-year-old murder that should have been solved easily, not easily, but it should have been solved. The clues were there, and then somebody like me comes along and kind of makes fun of them for not solving it. They didn't like that. I used to go to Suffolk County on my way to the way to the Hamptons. Obviously, I don't go there anymore because they have my license plate number, I think. But they'll get over it.
Yes, I wonder if you could talk a little bit more about the actual process of two people writing a novel together. That strikes me as a challenging thing to attempt, and I'd just like to know how you really go about that with the two of you.
Well, Greg, you co-author. It's not an easy process, as you know, and I'd only co-authored one book before that, which was Mayday. The lady here mentioned Mayday, 1979. And I co-authored it with Tom Block, who was a childhood friend. Tom and I knew each other since we were 4 years old. We grew up together down the block, kind of thing. And he became a U.S. Air pilot, and he did writing on the side. And I was a novelist, and I wanted to do this airline disaster novel, which became Mayday. So I said, Tom, why don't we team up? You have all the technical expertise of what would happen to an airplane that suffered decompression, 35, 40,000 feet, whatever, 50,000 feet. And he had all technical stuff, and somewhere along the line, he and I mean, he thought that he was a writer, and we started clashing, two alpha male egos clashing over this project, which I thought I was supposed to be dominating, and it really put a lot of strain on the relationship. The book got great reviews. It went on to become a CBS TV movie of the week with Don Johnson, and the sales were great, and it was a Book of the Month Club selection and all that. But it put a strain on the relationship to the extent we barely spoke to each other for 2 years. But we mended it, and it's okay. But we agreed that we will never co-author another book. And I said I would never co-author another book with anybody ever again. I had a little sign on my desk that said collaborators will be shot. So. But then Simon & Schuster, about 4 years ago, came to me and they said, we'd like you to create a series with a co-author. And which became the series that was, of Brody and Taylor. And I said, no, I don't think so. But, they were kind of pushing for it. The agent was pushing for it. I said, well, maybe it's worth another try. And so we did a contest where my agents asked other agents to have some of their authors who wanted to be my co-author to submit a chapter on a specific subject, submitted blind with no name. So we didn't know who the author was. It could have been male, female, it could have been young, old, we didn't know. And out of the 7 that we called down, we picked one, and I won't tell you his name, but he was a good writer in his own right, and he had some successful books. But he and I remembered Tom Block and Mayday. I said, this is not working. And so I put it aside. I just realized I couldn't work with anybody, and for the agent. And the publisher was pushing. Nelson, have you found a new co-author? I said, no. But one day I was sitting by myself late at night, I remember, in my lazy boy recliner with a glass of something in my hand. And Alex's name popped into my brain. I said, I know an author. But of course, knowing Alex is a screenwriter, but Alex had tried a few novels. So I called him at night. And I said, how would you like to co-author a novel with me? And he said, no. He might have heard the stories of the Tom Block Mayday disaster. But then I mentioned a number in advance that the publisher was willing to.
It wasn't an internship, I learned. So
it wasn't a freebie. So he said, well, okay, we can talk. So that's why I talked him into it. But it was taking a chance, to go to your publisher and tell them, I did find a co-author, it was my son, and we're gonna write this together. They were a little bit nervous at first, but Alex was an award-winning screenwriter, You got a first place at Comic-Con for one of your films. He had the credentials, and he also owed me 4 years of Yale tuition that he promised to pay back someday. So I figured this might do it. And we started off with, Deserter, which was already, maybe a third done. So he kind of came into the project without knowing who these characters were, or, why are we doing this? But learned very quickly, and I was there to help for the first book. And it was a successful book. It debuted at #3 on the New York Times list, which is unusual for a new series co-authored book. And then this one he wrote mostly on his own, so I can retire.
Well, you had a little input, but I was doing let's say I came up with the broad strokes, wrote a proposal. He would read the proposal, edit the proposal, we'd work on it together. And then, I was doing the first draft. Every once in a while, we'd sort of do an in-person kind of story conference to say, okay, where is this going? Or I'll tell him, this is what I'm thinking, and then he would give me his thoughts, and I'd go off again, and we would talk again in like 2 months, and there were 3 about it. So there was long stretches of me writing alone, and then we would have these intense back and forths, and then I'd go off again. That's kind of the process we did. And as far as clashing egos go, I mean, he's done it 22 times. This is my 2nd time, so I was a little humble. I pushed back sometimes, but not too many.
I think we have time for one more question, if anyone has. Here we are.
I'll repeat the question. Thank you. Yeah, the audio should be out now for this book. It's Scott Brick, the audio. Scott Brick has done all my John Corey books, and he's become kind of the voice of John Corey. Scott was an actor, and he lives in L.A. I met him a number of occasions. Very nice man. He was kind of like every other actor in L.A. He was out of work, and somehow fell into this maybe 20, 25 years ago when audio books was first starting to get popular. And I'm sure in the beginning it didn't pay much, but it was, it was work. He has a good voice, but I can't think of the first one of mine he did, but I remember he wrote to me and said, I just read this great book, and you wrote it, and I just recorded it. So he became a fan, which I think helps. I think maybe it's in his voice, there's some enthusiasm. And no matter what he's doing, he's going to do, he'll do a John Corey book, he'll put everything else. He's become very popular now. He's won many, many awards. And his price has gone up too, but that's good. I don't pay it, so that's good. But as long as he had he had some throat problems. But the man is a trooper, and he's much in demand. And a lot of people who write to me about my books, they'll say, I listened to the audio, and what a great book. And I always forward those emails on to Scott, so that he knows that he's got fans out there too. Yeah, he enjoys reading them. If he had a couple of drinks, he can tell you stories about books he doesn't enjoy reading that he has to work up the enthusiasm for.
Yeah, there was a few times when I was writing this book and writing some unpronounceable German, and I thought about Scott Brick, and I'm like, I hope he can pull this off. I have no idea how the hell to say this word, but.
Well, Nelson, Alex, thank you for sharing your time tonight. Thank you to everyone for being here. The gentleman will be signing over at that table momentarily. I see a lot of people have books. If you have not already, please see Chrissy and Eve from Elm Street Books at the book table just to the right. And thank you again for being here. This was
Thank
wonderful.
you.